Hey guys, it's Nature Nate. Before we start the episode, just wanted to say I hope you're all well, hope you're safe. We wanted to share a little bit more about our sponsor who's trying to help the world right now with their work. This pandemic has affected everyone. To get through this, we all need to work together. Cypress River Advisors, with their deep cross-border sourcing and manufacturing knowledge, are providing PPEs for free to medical professionals and communities in need. They're providing protective equipment in New York, California, Michigan, and Japan. They're also providing data visualizations to help make policymakers and the public understand the real impacts of the pandemic. For more information, go to cypressriveradvisors.com/COVID-19. All right, now on to the episode. Today, we interview Christine Bader, an ex-CSR person. She was the director of social responsibility at Amazon from 2015 to 17, and before that, she managed social impact at BP. She was also an advisor to the UN Secretary General's Special Representative on Business and Human Rights. And she's also the author of The Evolution of a Corporate Idealist, When Girl Meets Oil, a book about her time at BP.
And it's all about what's the right case. How do you make the case for the person sitting across the room from you? If you get to the point where you're putting dollars on a human life, that's when I'm happy to call bullshit and say we should not be having this conversation anymore.
Clearly, this is someone who understands the intersection between business, environment, and humans. I was really excited to get a chance to sit down and talk with her. But here's the thing. After we started chatting, I realized that there was a deeper conversation we could have about the emotional journey of doing CSR.
Because after the Deepwater Horizon disaster, I was like, what the? I had this amazing 9-year run with this company that I love.
You can Google what CSR is. I've said it a couple times, but it's corporate social responsibility in case you don't know. But you rarely get to hear about someone's emotional journey in CSR. And Christine has had quite a journey.
I went through this personally, like, who am I? And what am I an expert in? And what do I believe? It just wasn't really the life that I wanted. It took a lot for me to give myself permission to quit.
After leaving Amazon, she started to think about what work would be like in the future and what was the life that she wanted to have. Today, Christine Bader has co-founded The Life I Want, which is a storytelling project that reimagines a future of work. This is super relevant, and I could not foresee at the time how relevant our conversation would be living in a world where work has been totally disrupted. In our conversation recorded in her lovely home in McMinnville, Oregon, we talk about employee activism, leaving the CSR world, and what that means to leave and what comes after. It's less about what does a person do for a CSR job, and it's more about how do we feel working within companies that try to do the right thing. All right, play the tape. Welcome to Waste Not, Why Not, a podcast about sustainability and how not to save the environment. I'm Nature Nate, an environmental researcher based in Taiwan working on energy, ocean, and waste issues. First off, how are you doing today? How are you feeling?
I'm great. It's a rare blue sky here in lovely Oregon in the winter, so I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, I'm not going to take credit for it, but there is a correlation. Mm-hmm. So I think to get started, what got you first interested in, making business better? What was like the first moment where you had this kind of thought of being in business and earning an income and generating profit could also help our society?
So for that, I'm going to go pretty far back. So growing up in New York City, both of my parents worked in business. They would disappear in the morning and get on the subway and come home at night. But I didn't understand what a career in business would mean. So when I graduated from undergraduate, I wanted to do jobs where I understood the impact that those jobs had on real people's lives. So after college, I joined an AmeriCorps program called City Year. So that was doing full-time community service. I served in Providence, Rhode Island, working as a teacher's aide, basically, in an underserved public elementary school. But City Year was really the first time that I saw the role that business could play. So for them, it wasn't just about having companies write a check. People would come, executives would come serve with us. So we would have service days where there were physical service projects. So they would come paint the wall of a community center with us. They would come visit the schools where we were serving. It was the first time that I got to interact with corporate executives, proactively thinking about the role that they wanted their company to serve in the community.
Okay. So you have this first service experience with AmeriCorps, and then you go to college after this? This is during college.
So this was the year after college. I hopped around doing a bunch of one-year programs after school because I really didn't know what I wanted to do.
I can relate.
Yes, and I'm sure many of your listeners can. I worked at a prep school, Phillips Academy Andover, just north of Boston. I was helping run their community service program. And then after that, I went back home to New York City, which is where I grew up, and worked in city government. And in all of those roles, I was serving in communities that were poor, for example, because companies had left and taken the jobs with them, or companies had moved in and either failed to hire anybody from the communities that they had moved into, or they were doing things that were much more insidious. They were not paying their fair share of taxes. They were polluting. They were lobbying to have a community garden turned into a parking lot. And there were tensions because, for example, in city government, I saw how companies were wooed for the jobs and the tax revenues, but they also had to be regulated. So in working in the nonprofit and public sectors, I started to see the power of business. And I started to think, well, who are these business people?
These shadowy elites that shift our cities.
Right.
Surely they're people.
Surely they are people. And I met some of them, again, serving alongside them at city or working with them in city government, right? And even at the prep school that I was working at, it was a very privileged institution. But it was working with, for example, Lawrence, Massachusetts, which used to be a bustling mill town before a lot of the manufacturing moved overseas. So it was really thinking about what is the role of privilege and wealth and money and moneyed institutions in places that need help. What is that relationship?
And then we've mentioned CSR a couple times.
Yeah.
How would you, because I understand you teach a course on sort of human rights in business, how would you define CSR for your students? And then how would you define CSR just for someone maybe at a cocktail party?
Sure. I think it's changed. Broadly, it is about what is the role of business in society. I do think that the term CSR has come to mean everything and nothing, though.
Yeah.
So the course that I used to co-teach at Columbia with my friend Joanne Bauer is on business and human rights. And that community of people who are thinking about business and human rights and calling it that really embrace that phraseology because there is a universal declaration of human rights. It is a set of 30 rights and freedoms that the international community agreed in 1948. There is no universal declaration of CSR. Nobody knows what it means, and it's different in every company. So human rights is a little bit scary. I don't think it should be, but it's a little bit scary because it immediately, if you mention human rights to people who don't often think about it, it conjures up thoughts of abuses, right? And atrocities.
And you start to think, oh, am I actually violating human rights?
Right. What have I done wrong? What's gone wrong?
Is that a human rights violation, or is that just normal business practices in my, textile factory in Southeast Asia? But
if you actually read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it's all the good things, right? It's right to work. It's right to an adequate standard of living. There are some of those rights, which is about protecting people from the really bad things, right? Freedom from torture, freedom from slavery. It's actually a really helpful starting place, even when somebody comes to CSR for the first time and says, well, what is this? Okay, well, here's one reference document that you can use to figure it out.
So the first time that you started approaching human rights was with your time at BP, right? British Petroleum, or Beyond Petroleum. What was sort of your first day or your first day with sort of the human rights question like?
Well, I will share with you the first really visceral experience that I had, which was back in 2000. I joined BP as a commercial analyst because that's what you do when you graduate from business school. You are running spreadsheets. But I had told anybody who would listen in the company that I was really interested in the role of business in society. So that's part of why I went out to Indonesia, because there was a lot of commercial work to do. BP had just taken over Arco, the American oil company, but it was in a place that had lots of social and environmental sensitivities. So one of the reasons that BP took over Arco was for this one gas field. in West Papua, a very big, very lucrative, very important gas field. And BP has built liquefied natural gas processing plants all over the world. So technically, this would be pretty straightforward. But BP had never done that in a place like West Papua. It's the easternmost tip of Indonesia, and it's an incredibly sensitive place. So BP was in the middle of the environmental and social impact assessment. So how would this affect air and water quality? How many people would be employed directly by the project? But unfortunately, the history of extractive projects around the world has shown that those are not usually the most contentious and complicated issues. So, for example, by law, the Indonesian military would be protecting the project. And the Indonesian military was not known for their good community relations.
Right, and especially with all those different islands, all those different cultures.
Yeah.
Was there a dimension of indigenous
Absolutely.
cultures, spirit, sort of like, spiritual sacred grounds?
Yes.
Okay, so
all
this sounds
of those
very
things.
complicated.
It was very complicated, and that was not going to be covered in a government ESIA. Right? So as all of these issues started popping up about security, about indigenous culture, and there was a lot of discrimination there. I mean, culturally, Papuans are closer affiliated with Melanesian cultures than with Malaysian, Javanese culture, right? So very different cultures, and most of the quote-unquote ruling class in Indonesia is Javanese.
And then how did you fit in sort of this larger expat community? Did you feel like you were able to make meaningful connections with people there, or did you sort of feel like you had to kind of work to prove yourself, to kind of build that trust? You were working with the community to kind of help them deal with this new project?
So first it was, I'm running my spreadsheets, right? And there are these memos flying around, and this is back in 2000. There were actually memos.
Paper memos
Okay. Flying around the office about these tricky issues coming up with this project, right? Of security, of human rights, of community relationships. And again, back in 2000, there wasn't an army of CSR professionals to deploy. They couldn't just say, oh, we've got a bunch of CSR people in headquarters. They'll come out and, tell us what to do here. So I basically put my hand up and I said, this is exactly what I would love to dive into. Can I just do some of this? And they were like, yeah, sure, please. Wait, to somebody.
Christine, go, please. Go, yeah, we're having a hard time.
Exactly. And so it was like, okay, let me figure out what can we do here? What needs to be done? Human rights? Okay, who are some human rights experts? Oh, there are macroeconomic impacts here. Let's bring in a macroeconomic impact assessment person, because there are people who do that. But then, very much getting to know people in the NGO community, the embassy communities in Jakarta, and understanding, okay, who's working on West Papua? Who are some groups that could help us? Because also that area is really remote, but obviously, tapping into the knowledge of our local staff, and then understanding who do they know? Who should we be working with as a company? I did go out there to Papua a few times, and I think that trying to learn the language certainly demonstrates a certain, level of intent, right?
Yeah, if you're speaking with people in a language they understand, they're usually going to be a bit more receptive than, just this random foreigner who has translators. Hopefully they have translators.
Yeah.
That sounds like a lot of work to manage as kind of your first role at BP, and then suddenly you're in this intercultural context between, sounds like multiple national governments. What would you do differently if you could somehow travel back in time with the knowledge you have now? Is there anything you would do differently to make that experience better, either for you or for others?
Well, I think one is language competency. So I think I got competent in Indonesian, but I didn't come close to learning local dialects. So I think achieving fluency would have been great. But that said, I do think it's even more important to do what the jargony phrase is of capacity building, right? Of training up local staff. I mean, I would go out there once in a while, but I shouldn't be the person on the ground there. So my role after Indonesia, we can come back to Indonesia if you like, but was in China working on a BP joint venture with Sinopec, one of China's state-owned energy companies. And there my job was to find, recruit, train somebody to be there for the long term who was not a foreign expat.
Okay.
Right?
And so what year was this in China? Because I feel like,
2003.
Okay. So that was like enthusiasm about China's ramping up. The Olympics will be in 5 years. So you're kind of on like the golden period, right, of that early reform and opening up. Did you choose China? How did that job kind of appear?
Yeah, so I was with BP in Indonesia for a couple of years, but that was never meant to be a permanent assignment, and BP likes to rotate people around every few years. So it was time for me to start thinking about what my next gig was. And again, there wasn't a well-formed, and some would say still isn't, a well-formed CSR career path. So I was looking at commercial jobs, but I was also doing a much more organic job search of saying, I'm still really interested in these issues at the intersection of business and society. What do you got? And so then the call came to work on this project in China.
You were based in Beijing?
Shanghai.
Okay. And again, what was that like? Because now you had preparation. I had experience in Indonesia. Did you know any Mandarin?
No.
Or any Shanghainese?
No. So the naivete of thinking, oh, well, I picked up Indonesian. That was easy.
I thought Mandarin was easy too. 10 years later,
Right. No. So that I tried. And again, the effort and the intention did win me some goodwill, shall we say, but did not win me any ease of communication.
What were some of the major differences? I mean, I know Indonesia and China are, in many ways quite different, and maybe in some ways similar too. Spread across a geographic area, imbalances between different ethnic groups within the country. What did you see were some of the differences or similarities for this new role?
I don't even want to try to compare them. They were so different in terms of. So I'd rather just talk about the project and what it was. So the project in Indonesia was a lot about external stakeholder engagement, but in China, it was very much about our joint venture partners and trying to come up with a shared set of standards and probably most importantly, alignment on responsibility for those standards, because the biggest issue that my BP colleagues saw that they brought me in to address was about housing for the migrant workers that would come in to build this chemicals plant. So at the time, this was going to bring in a workforce of about 40,000 migrant construction workers.
And these are migrant construction workers who are
within
Chinese
China.
and is within China.
That's right. Into a town of about the same size.
So you're just making a town to build this new factory.
A temporary
town.
Yeah, which has all sorts of disruptive impacts on land prices, on food prices, on other institutions that might pop up to serve the needs of single male migrant workers away from home.
Right.
And those workers would be hired by a construction company that would be a contractor to the joint venture. And historically, all companies, but certainly Chinese companies would say that is the responsibility of the contractor. But as we have seen since the supply chain scandals of Nike and others in the 1980s, that is not considered responsible business today. And this was a very big investment for BP and a very high-profile joint venture. So BP really wanted to, quote unquote, get it right and not have a lot of disruption, not have a fire tear through the dormitories that would kill thousands of people in one fell swoop. So part of my job was to draft standards for the dormitories.
Okay, interesting.
So things like we need smoke detectors. So I drafted the standards and it said the dormitories shall have fire alarms and smoke detectors. And the process was that we had these in-house translators. So I would send it to the translator, and then it would go to our our joint venture counterparts, and then it would come back to the translator and come back to me. And so we had about 3 rounds where it came back to me and smoke detectors had been crossed out. And it said, dormitories shall have fire alarms. And so I would keep inserting smoke detectors, and then it would come back and it would crossed out. And then finally we sat down to have a meeting with the translator there. And I said, this should say fire alarms and smoke detectors. And there'd be some huddling and some back and forth. And they'd say, no. no, they're the same thing. And I say, no, they are different. You have fire alarms for when there is a fire. If there is just smoke, there are smoke detectors, and there'd be some huddling. They're the same thing. No, they're not. They're different. And then they'd realize they were different. And then they'd say, oh, no, we don't do that. We don't do smoke detectors. Yes, I know you don't do smoke detectors generally, but we're going to do them here because it's important. They save this many lives if there's a fire. More huddling. Oh, no.
That's a frequent response. Sort of, we don't do that here.
That's
not the way
here.
Things are done.
Yeah.
How are you able to break through that loggerhead? Because even in a U.S. domestic company, we should have pollution monitors here. We don't do that here.
So that demonstrated a lot of why I wrote the book, frankly, my book that came out in 2014. And it was a lot about the challenges of working in corporate social responsibility that were very much in my face then. But I found that a lot of my peers faced these challenges in other companies, no matter what geography they're working in and what industry. And it's all about what's the right case. How do you make the case for the person sitting across the room from you? And often it is an economic case. I tried the economic case of saying, well, it'll save you this much money. And then I would think, well, this is ridiculous. I'm not making an economic case about how many lives we're going to save.
That gets kind of grim if you start doing that life and death calculus.
Yeah, and you know the story of the Ford Pinto. This is one of these sort of classic CSR cases from their tiny, crappy car.
This is the tiny car that just exploded.
It would explode, right?
Okay.
And so then some damning memos came out about how Ford could have put some safety features in, but they would cost X amount, and they figured that the cost of a lawsuit was actually less than the cost of putting the safety. If you get to the point where you're putting dollars on a human life, that's when I'm happy to call bullshit and say we should not be having this conversation anymore. But for some people, you have to at least test that and have that conversation. So we tried a couple of different things, and then what I should have realized earlier, given where I was working, was that the argument that finally worked was when I said, these are the standards that world-class model companies use, and we want this to be a first-class model project. Oh, why didn't you say so?
Well, if that's what everyone else does.
But I found that a lot of people who I interviewed for my book faced this same challenge everywhere. And I quoted John Elkington, who's one of the godfathers of CSR, saying that, I really used to envy James Bond because when James Bond goes into the cockpit of whatever vehicle he's got to take over, he knows exactly what buttons to push, right? And what levers to pull. And John Elkington said to me, I find myself going into boardrooms all the time and I'm never quite sure which button to push or which lever to pull.
That's the weirdest thing. Sometimes you go in and you think, okay, you have this really elaborate, point to make, this case, this economics, and then they just say, but what's the right thing to do? We just want to do the right thing. You're like, I have all these slides. You sure you don't want to see the slides? And then so it feels really just like you're doing an experiment in the dark almost, because people are so complicated. Mm-hmm. So the strategy changes, and so. You're in China, you're kind of figuring this out, you're figuring out how to do this work, and what's after China? What comes next?
Yeah, so then I went back to London, to BP headquarters. I did another spreadsheety job for a little while, in part to make sure I didn't forget how to use Excel, but also so that, I paid a lot of money for that MBA, but also so that people in the company still knew what to do with me. Because CSR, and again, we can discuss whether that's changed today, it's still a place where I think one needs to prove that you understand the business values and drivers of the company. And one of my friends has described himself as an NGO in a suit. He's kind of an undercover activist inside a company, right? And there's a little bit of that. So I do advise people to make sure that not only you are truly well steeped in the language of finance and of the company, but that everybody else knows that you are too. So I felt like I needed to kind of do some time as a commercial analyst.
So I understand that impulse, and I feel like I felt the same way, coming out of grad school. I got to be professional. I got to wear a suit. I got to have my hair cut short. I can't have dreadlocks and talk about climate change because people aren't going to take me seriously. If I'm wearing a suit, I'm cleaned up, I look like the people I'm talking with, then maybe they'll understand me better. But in that same space, I feel like you kind of run the risk of eventually becoming maybe more like them in sort of your internal voice, where you kind of unconsciously start to self-censor yourself because you start to kind of argue the company's points before your own. And then, I mean, how do you maintain that inner sense of your inner moral compass, I guess?
Yes, and I love that you asked this. Also because I actually think this has changed in the last 2 to 3 years, right? And I've been working in this space for 20 years. First of all, having a strong community outside of work is really important. Keeping in touch with my friends from business school, and I went to the Yale School of Management, which has always been an MBA program that's oriented towards quote unquote, educating leaders for business and society is their mission tagline. And it was true. And that's why my friends there went to business school. So I feel like keeping in touch with them has helped hold me accountable for who I've always wanted to be and for the impact that I wanted to have. And that's also part of why I wrote the book, to sort of identify, name, and unify this community of people, because I do feel like we all hold each other accountable to some extent. It is a real danger, and it's one that where I quoted a couple of different people in the book talking about that. And one of them said, I realized that when I started using we instead of them with my friends at the pub when I was talking about my company, they called me out on that, right? And that was a moment when I thought, ooh.
Because it's a weird position to be in, because you're a part of the company, but you're not.
Yeah. And I think that part of our role of people doing this work inside companies is to serve as a sort of translator. It's meeting with activists and then saying in the company, like, okay, this is what those people are saying. And then to activists saying, I understand what you're saying. Let me just share with you some of the sort of what's going on the ground, right? Like the operational realities of it. So there is this tricky role of serving as a translator. Now, what I think is so interesting just in the past couple years is the rise of employee activism. And I wrote an op-ed about this in Reuters in maybe June 2018, because it's partly, I think, in the wake of Trump's election that people are really frustrated and angry and figuring out that, wait a second, actually, where I work has tremendous power, and also, actually, wait a second, tremendous complicity in the things that I am getting really angry about. And what is my role here? And I don't think that people tolerate anymore having to check their morals and their values at the door.
All right, we're going to take a break from our interview with Christine. When we come back, we're going to dive deeper into the rise of climate activism, Christine's time at Amazon, self-care and sustainability, and lastly, what's the kind of future we truly want? Christine has mentioned a lot of good articles, books, and references. We are going to include those links in the show notes so you can read what she's written, see what she said, and learn more good stuff from her. If you like the show and want to support us, we have a newsletter. You can subscribe at wastenotwhynot.substack.com. You can get weekly and sometimes bi-weekly updates on the show, along with memes, articles, and just random hot takes that I have. Okay, let's get back to the interview. It's interesting to kind of watch these sort of waves of different sustainability and environmental policies, right? It feels like CSR was sort of born out of at least sort of the initial, George Bush, the younger years, where can we really trust the government to fully act on climate change? I mean, looking at the current administration compared to that one in terms of climate change, it's striking how different they are. But even then, it felt like, okay, companies need to pick up the slack. Then it was just very US centric, but there are other governments had similar developments. Canada had Harper, and they weren't really doing anything sustainable. And then the US had Obama, and then, it felt like the federal government got really strong again. And it felt like, that's when, a lot of my peers were like, oh, maybe I'll work in the federal government. And then, again, as soon as Trump got elected, consortium of companies, we're going to throw down $1 billion. We're going to get really serious, corporate campaigns like RE100 seem to take a lot more precedence. And then, as you said, corporate activism started. But then I feel like there were some other changes, and there was the Green New Deal as a concept started to come out. And that's something that even if a business supported a Green New Deal, they're not going to be able to do it, unilaterally. And then also you see, probably related,
youth climate strikes. Is it Trump or what do you think changed from, when you wrote your book until now? What were some of the key inflection points?
Yeah, it's a great question and very timely because as I'm writing, I'm now working on the second edition of my book. So I'm trying to get up to speed on what has changed. And I do think that it's all about climate. Like, I think that even in the past 6 years since the book came out, the planet has been screaming at us louder and louder. And then I think that coupled with people looking for ways to impact the world around them because people see that so much is broken. I think that that's where a lot of the rise of just awareness and activism has come from. I think some of it, Trump is, again, as many analysts have talked about, more of a symptom than the actual problem, but a pretty dramatic symptom.
Right. Populism, seeing a lack of demand. And the thing that kind of frightens me about the climate is that it's just going to get worse. Yeah. Not to be pessimistic, but just to be, accurate about what's going to happen. Storms are going to increase, droughts are going to increase. And now we've kind of reached a point where it almost doesn't matter. Even if someone like, an oil major were to become carbon neutral, there's still so many other countries, there's still so much other emissions rising that we're going to keep seeing these negative feedbacks. And just personally, I see a lot of people getting interested in climate now. And they'll be like, okay, Nate, I've been working on climate change for 3 months. How do I deal with the stress? I'm like, get used to it. I don't know what to tell, but that worries me because you can't expect a payoff, and you're gonna have a lot of people. You have all these high schoolers striking, and they're gonna, like I thought, I'll do the environment for 5 years, 10 years, and we'll fix it, and then I'll move on and I'll do abstract art. What do you tell someone? How do you?
Well, one of the very helpful cliches is that it is a marathon, not a sprint. And I did read a lovely book by Wayne Muller, has written a few really lovely books. And one is called A Life of, I'm going to get the title not exactly right, but it's something like A Life of Having, Being, and Doing Enough.
Okay.
And in there he quotes Jesus is saying, the poor will always be with us. And I am not a religious person, but my layman's takeaway from that and the way that Wayne and I talked about it was kind of get over yourself. Get over yourself. Like, you are not going to fix this. And actually, we'll all be grateful for the work that you do and the contribution that you make, but you will not fix this. You will actually get closer to fixing it if you get some sleep and if you have a healthy life. You will do a better job.
Drink water, self-care.
Exactly. Get some exercise. The poor will always be with us.
I think that's an interesting concept too about, what is your role? Right? Like if you work with a team and your team pushes the board, pushes the company to commit to, let's just say 100% renewable energy, because that's something I think about a lot. Is that your, does that cancel out your carbon emissions? I don't know if there's like a right answer, but, I think the way we conceptualize what counts as change and what counts as the burden can really put a lot of impact on people. I think if we tell people, hey, if you fly, you're shrinking the Arctic by 30 feet, right? Mm-hmm. That's going to give you some neurosis. That's going to definitely mess you up. But if we change that, maybe we can make people feel like they're part of a team and they're not so alone.
Yep.
And they have that community.
Yeah. So I think all of these conversations about what is my role personally and how much hypocrisy can I handle for myself are really interesting. And there's no good answer. So with my family, we just spent a year in Bali with our kids who are twins who are in second grade. They did first grade at the Green School in Bali, and it's all about educating the next generation of sustainable leaders. And we talked a lot about some of the ironies in a destination green school. The fact that our one-way flights there alone put more carbon in the air than most of us should emit in a lifetime. So what's up with that? Like, how do I think about that? Right? Have we just completely undone all of our good intentions? Well, yes. to some respects, but I have no idea what impact that year will have on my kids. Will they grow up with consciousness, with the awareness so embedded that they live differently and they are part of the solution down the road in a way that outdoes the damage that we've done in the past year? I don't know. I don't know that. And, we've seen how Al Gore responds to criticisms of his flying all over the world, and lots of other climate activists flying all over the world. And they say, well, hopefully the impact that I'm going to have outdoes. And you can believe that and not. And again, I don't know the answer to that. But I think it's something that we all need to figure out for ourselves, particularly because some of us could easily get paralyzed, right? By saying, well, I can't fly anywhere ever again.
Yeah, can't fly, can't go to the movies.
Right.
You can't eat food, right? Because food is carbon emissions. You don't want to go to the bathroom, don't want to, don't want to take out your trash, because if you just keep it in your house, you're not throwing it away, right? I mean, sometimes
it can get a little bit silly.
I remember for my birthday, I was looking at some stickers, and there was ocean animal stickers, and we were like ocean animals, and I thought, it's just trash. It's your birthday. You can kind of build it in, and it feels like maybe certain types of people are predisposed to the environment, and certain types of people are predisposed to environmental anxiety. But I think having a community, having other people, being a part of the Green School. Was there anything at the Green School that you thought was a really good takeaway that you'd want to share with other people who maybe aren't going to be able to join the Green School or fly there or go there?
Yeah, it was a profound experience in a lot of ways. So again, I have a son and a daughter. They're twins. They're now 7.5. We went with one suitcase each for a year. And we came back probably with less because some of it kind of molded and disintegrated while we were there. But that was really profound. And then coming back here, finding a place and then thinking about, we've got all this stuff in storage. Like, what is all this stuff? But I really think we are much more hyper-vigilant about our stuff, about the stuff that we take in. Also because in Bali, there is not the municipal infrastructure to whisk away our garbage. So people burn garbage, and so there are major air pollution problems. And the plastics problem in Bali is obscene. And now there are bans on single-use plastics in Bali, but the plastic that's washing up on the beaches is not all from Bali, right? It's from all over Southeast Asia. So I think that where it was so in our faces there was really profound that we could see it, because again, here it just kind of gets whisked away, and that might not happen for much longer because China is no longer taking our recycling. But I don't think that that's a bad thing, because I think if people have to manage and see all the stuff that they're throwing out, right, we might do less of it.
So in Taiwan, we have a really amazing recycling system, really good waste management system. And one of the things about Taiwan is you have to pay for the garbage you throw away by volume. And not only that, you have to go out and wait for the garbage truck to come, and you have to stand with your neighbors, and you feel a lot of garbage shame. I do anyway, because apparently there was some training that people undergo or they learn about how to fold their trash. The trash bags look clean and they maximize the volume, and my garbage bag is just, it's a mess. It looks like I was packing to go somewhere, and it's just filled that way. But
I love that though.
But it makes you think about it. And in America, it's like a contest. Like, I got to fill my bin. So those strange little signals and incentives and just comparing, bearing witness, seeing other places can change you. And so the Green School obviously had an impact. And then what does the future hold? You've taken this career of sustainability, of human rights, of working with very large companies. What do you want to do with that?
What do you want to be when you grow up, Christine? I don't know. Well, what I have turned my attention to now is how do we fix work so that it enables the lives we want rather than sticking us with the lives we're stuck with. And so I've launched a project with my friend Eva Dienel. It's the lifeiwant.co. And it's a storytelling project about a future of work that works for all. Because I got this job at Amazon in 2015. I was their first director of social responsibility. And on paper, that was the peak of my career. That was the job I'd been working towards for 20 years. And for a while, it was great. And I got to build this amazing team and be in the belly of the beast of this historic company and do really good work. But I wasn't living the life that I wanted. I didn't get to see my kids enough. I wasn't working crazy hours, but still. And I wasn't really living in the right city. It just didn't feel, it was like I was planting in the wrong soil. It just wasn't really the life that I wanted. And so it took a lot for me to give myself permission to quit. And, after I did, it was when I started telling people that I was quitting that I started to see how broken work is, because I would tell people and there would be this surprise. Like, what do you mean you're not getting fired? Like, what?
You want to leave?
And then there would be this sort of, wait, you can do that? You can choose to walk away? And not even just my colleagues at Amazon, but, friends and people who I would meet who just felt so trapped by work, that work was supposed to be empowering. And at some point, it's become the opposite. And whether it's because you need health insurance, whether it's because people are living in a house that's too big with one or two too many cars and have a ridiculous amount of debt, or student debt because our student debt crisis has gotten so out of control. Like, there are some traps that are a choice of lifestyle. Many are not, but some are. But people feel so trapped.
What's strange is that work, the concept of the weekend, the concept of labor unions, the concept of 40 hours a week was a concept that people had to fight for. Mm-hmm. And we assumed it was just sort of the bare minimum. And it feels like as a society, we're going, we have robots now. This is like the Jetsons to someone from the past. And we're still behaving like we're all working in factories. And that has so many other interrelated issues.
Yes.
And I feel like it gets even worse when you're doing your passion career, right?
Yes.
Because you're expected, maybe you expect this of yourself, maybe other people expect it of you, to do this work. And then you feel like you said, you can't leave. And then you start to feel guilty. You feel guilty about the planet. You feel guilty about yourself. Mm-hmm. And then it almost feels like, what do I do? Like you said, quitting is good. How do you quit? How did you come to this conclusion? I mean, because I feel like if I was in your position, it would, I don't know if I would have the courage to just, cast it aside. What was there one moment that made you feel, okay, I'm ready to do this. I'm ready to leave?
Yeah, it was the moment when I got home from work and my husband, who had quit his job so that I could take this one, was sitting with our kids who were then, they were 3 or 4 then. They were sitting on the couch reading, as they often were when I got home from work, but they were reading to him. When did you learn how to read?
That's painful.
It was painful. And, I had my kids when I was 40. I'm not having any more kids. So I will never again have a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old. I want more time with them. And so there was a point when it became not even a choice anymore. It was just something that I really had to do. But I have been thinking about quitting, and I wrote this essay for the New York Times, The Year I Learned to Quit, and realized that a lot of it is about giving ourselves permission, because nobody else was going to give me permission to quit. But then I think after the permission, there are a couple of other pieces that are really important too, and one of them is about quitting well and quitting with closure and grace and gratitude, and then also rest, like the importance of taking a break is really important too, so that you can then truly do what quitting is for, which is move on to the next thing that is really the right thing for you now.
And that takes sustainability to a different level, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's a responsibility to yourself. That's a sustainability of your own life.
Yeah.
And you're not letting, your dreams burn you out, basically. And
Yeah.
and we all know burning is not sustainable.
Right. Well, and the other piece that has been really powerful to me is realizing that stepping out of this world for a little while of CSR and sustainability actually gives me a much better view of it. Right? Some perspective. And one of the books that's had a really big impact on me in the last couple of years was Otto Scharmer's book, Theory U, and he runs the Presencing Institute, which is really deep leadership work. And so in his book, I was reading it, and this quote just leapt out off the page at me, and it was that the success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. The success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. And that for me was when it all snapped into place because, interior condition, and it kind of sounds like a work-life balance conversation, but it's actually much deeper than that. He's not just saying to like get some sleep and go do some yoga. He's actually talking about understanding your role in a system, understanding your purpose, and taking care of yourself too, but really understanding how you are and not just what you do.
Within the sustainability world, just to highlight that again, we don't talk really about how we're doing. It's sort of like how we're doing it. There's colleagues that I speak with, but I never say, when you say, where do you see yourself in 10 years? That has a career connotation. There could be a more internal.
Well, this is actually part of what inspired me to write my book, because after the Deepwater Horizon disaster, I was like, what the?
You were at BP when this happened.
No, I had left.
Okay.
So I was working on the UN mandate on business and human rights, and I had left. But I had this amazing 9-year run with this company that I loved. And there I was contributing to the UN mandate as an expert in corporate social responsibility, because at the time, Beyond Petroleum was a leader in all these things. So I went through this personally, like, who am I? And what am I an expert in? And what do I believe? And so to try to reconcile or understand some of these questions for myself, I started talking to peers in other companies. And again, these were people who I'd seen at conferences over the years, like, oh, hey, how's it going? What are you doing? What are you working on? But I'd never really actually sat down and talked to them about, how do you feel about what we're doing? Are we really having an impact, or are we just tweaking around the edges here? And so as people started to share how they felt about their work, then I thought, ooh, this story of this community really needs to be told. Because we don't have those conversations, and people do get hung up on, well, what field am I working in, or what's the title, or what's the sector? But it doesn't even get at, what do I want to be doing all day? I think it's really important for us to think about what's the skill set that we want to use all day, and then also acknowledging that that will change over time. Right? And I think that's a really important thing too, that your priorities change and the skills that you want to deploy and use will change, and the times around us change. So our role in the world has to change as all those different pieces change too. And I think embracing that and acknowledging that is really important too. And that's something that I had certainly never really understood before.
I think it's difficult. I mean, I guess when you talk about rest, it's intentional rest, right? It's looking at yourself and how you fit in. Because for the longest time, maybe others could relate to this. I wanted to be a scientist. I wanted to be an ecologist. I want to be a fisheries biologist. I want to do rivers. I want to do oceans. I want to do ocean economics. I want to be this one thing. And then the whole time, maybe it was talking. Maybe it's dancing for someone else. Maybe it's movies. But you're never going to know that unless you take the time to actually look inward. And maybe an issue with CSR is that we don't have these kinds of conversations. This is never something that we talked about in my master's program.
Yeah.
Maybe they should. Maybe there should be a class called just, how are you?
Well, yeah. So I went to the Yale School of Management for my MBA. There's a professor there named Amy Wisniewski, who one of her best known articles is about job crafting. And she has had students go out and interview alumni who are in the fields that they think they might be interested in. Like one woman who really wanted to go into asset management and interviewed an alum who was pretty senior at a bank doing that. And I don't know if she just caught her on a bad day or what, but she was like, I would never tell anybody to go into this field. I haven't had a date in 4 years. I have no life. My clients are all blah, blah. And, and this poor student was like, oh.
Maybe my dream is different now.
Right. But better to find out now than in 15 years.
Yeah, before
right?
you're locked in.
Yeah. And that was perhaps an extreme example, but I think that some structured reflection about not just the jobs we want, not just the fields that we want to go into, but what is the life that we want? I think that's really important, and that's why I'm focused on it now.
It's something that I feel like I understand a lot better now after having this conversation. So I feel like we could talk for many more hours, but I think we can just wrap it up here. I think we covered a lot of really good grounds. And if there's one thing that I'm taking away from this, it's to check in more with myself and how I'm doing. And I hope that people who listen to this can also check in with themselves and make sure that they're living the life that they want to live. Thank you, Christine, for inviting us into your home, literally, and to have a very frank and really beneficial conversation. So thank you again.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
I'm Nature Nate, and this has been the Waste Not, Why Not podcast, recorded in Christine's lovely living room in McMinnville, Oregon. Do you have a question for us? Email your voice recording at ask@wastenotwhynot.com. Give us a rating on Apple Podcasts. It really helps. Consider becoming a monthly supporter on Patreon. We are Waste Not Why Not on Patreon and Waste Not Pod on Twitter. Follow us. We also have a newsletter on Substack, wastenotwhynot.substack.com. Subscribe. Get emails from me. This has been a Ghost Island media production based in Taiwan. This episode was produced by Emily Y. Wu and myself, Nature Nate, edited by Yu-Chen Lai. Yu-Chen is also the production assistant, brand design by Thomas Lee. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.